Do you have a favorite SaaS application? Like, what's your go-to right now?
Is that a thing that people have?
I don't know.
I probably use Slack the most.
Okay. Well, what's something you found recently that's just like game changer? Awesome SaaS.
I was looking into NT. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I actually came across this years ago, and then I came across it last week. And it's essentially like a end-to-end encrypted not self-hosted, but like Google Cloud, self-sovereign Google Clouds. And it did kind of tap into that, part of me that still loves crypto and the big part of me that really hates Google.
NT, like just the letters NT?
No, ENTE.
Private cloud for your photos, videos, and more. Interesting.
Yeah. I'm kind of getting more interested in these like private cloud concepts, but it just wasn't like, honestly, it's like the UI kind of sucks.
The thing is, like, you explained it, but like I didn't understand what you're talking about, and I'm like, oh, it's just photo storage. But somehow you explained it in a way that made it sound like some weird, like, esoteric, like, software that I've never heard of. But it's just.
I say Google Photos. How esoteric can it be? I think they even pitched them. I think I saw the ad as like a pitch for like them being an alternative to Google Photos.
Okay, so it's a backup it's a cloud backup for photos, but it has privacy. How does it actually do the privacy side of things? Like, is it just self-hosted?
I would presume that it does it the same way that things like 1Password do it.
Oh, okay. Just like end-to-end encryption, and they can't really see what's going on.
Yeah, end-to-end encryption. They don't have a master key, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the thing is, I kind of thought that Google Photos and like iCloud kind of does that in some way. Do they not like have end-to-end encryption?
No. So there was a law passed recently in Australia that actually disallows. I don't know how broad sweeping this is. Like, I don't know which companies fall under this classification or which companies don't. There's a certain classification of communication company that is required by law to build in backdoors so that the government can request access to people's data.
Yeah, it's sounding a lot like China. It's an interesting law to pass.
Yeah, and like 157 like industry groups, including like Google, Facebook, and these guys came together. Like, this is a terrible idea for security. Like, it will make it near impossible for us to keep people secure.
Yeah,
and then they tried to also sneak into the law that this law applied retroactively. The original drafting of the law said this applies retroactively, and every technical person in the world was like, "That's not how encryption works. You can't just pass a law that says, oh, you have to decrypt all the things that you've previously encrypted."
That's ridiculous. Wait, so did that pass in Australia?
Mm-hmm. Without the backdating part, they removed that through industry advisement.
Okay, that's ridiculous. When did that pass? Like recently?
Nah, 5 years maybe.
Oh, okay. Well, clearly our lives moved on and no one really talked about it. But
yeah, it's been this way for ages. That's, I think, do you remember the days when you were younger and more hopeful about the world, AJ, where you'd people would send links to each other to like sign online petitions and like click this link to send an email to your local representative.
Yeah,
it was the only one I ever sent around to people. It was like, for the love of God, please let your local representative know that you really deeply oppose this bill.
That's wild. I can't believe I never saw that. That's interesting. Okay, well, that's depressing. Definitely got a little bit less hopeful today.
Terrible cold open. All right, let's start again.
Using optical sensors to detect voice.
So this is about as biotech as biotech gets.
They're moving data anywhere from 35 to 250 terabits per second.
It's just a tube for like a little robot that can drive.
That's a really good point. I didn't really think about that.
I spent all morning on the toilet this morning, AJ.
Nice.
And Indian food came back with a vengeance.
It's your mistake, man. You don't eat Indian food at night, man. It has to be in the morning or at lunch so you can get it all out of your system before you go to sleep. Otherwise, it's a rough night/morning.
Jeez. You speak like a wise guru.
We used to go to this Indian restaurant a lot. I won't say what the name is just in case they're still around. But we went there for like a solid year or two, like as soon as they opened. My parents always used to, like after tutoring, would like go there, get food. And it was this like huge expose on 60 Minutes about how uncleanly the entire restaurant was, how it was like, on average, they drop your food on the floor like once or twice, and like just, it's like roaches everywhere. They didn't clean any of the dishes. And yeah, we stopped going to that restaurant, but it was interesting. But I do feel like the food tasted better because of that, right? Like, if your food hasn't been on the floor at least twice, can you really say it was spiced? Like,
That's the jeez, that's the true spice.
yeah.
Why don't you just eat off the floor? That's just so much easier.
No, but I don't want to know it's been on the floor. I just want to, like, you know how like it tastes really good. You don't know what happened to it. You just know it tastes good, and you're like, you know what? Just don't tell me what's in it. Let me just enjoy it.
Fair enough. That is how I feel going to hawker centers sometimes. Like, you look around and you're like, there's not a single establishment in here that I want to know what their recent health rating was, but I will eat this food nonetheless.
Okay, that sounds like a good morning. I spent my morning, well, I was at the gym. I've been spending a lot of time on Facebook ads this week, which has been interesting. Just really in the weeds of like trialing different ads and creatives and sort of pumping them through. I think one thing we've noticed, there's a couple of different learnings, but the big learning is that creatives with women in it tend to perform better across both genders compared to men. And I've heard other people say this too, but we now have first-hand evidence that this is true. So I think we may just get rid of male creators for a bit, see what happens. I might introduce here and there. I might do some creatives myself, to be honest, just to test it, because it's easy. I just chuck the camera up in front of me. But yeah, that was a really interesting perspective to see, that both genders like convert better when a female is doing the creative as opposed to a male.
Interesting. What's a creative?
So creative is just a fancy term for the images or videos or the text that you use for ads. It's just like a broad term of like the creatives that you put through. Yeah.
Right. I was wondering whether you were talking about some like content creator influencer campaign that you're about to start pushing.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we're doing. Like, we're just getting, like, what we found is if you get influencers to do creatives for you, right? That's the term. And you put that on ads, that tends to do a little bit better as well. So rather than just getting the creator to do it on their own socials, like, which is like, you know, results can be here and there. It actually works pretty well if you like put that as an ad as well and directly just target people, because they're like, oh, you know, might target the people that have seen them before and they're like, oh, I recognize that face. That's cool. You know, click through.
Ads are getting pretty sneaky these days. You know, like my meme time is constantly being interrupted by ads that I'll watch for like 5 seconds before I realize it's an ad. And then I'm like, oh, fuck this. I move on. But
that's what you have to do now. It's just, there's just too many ads out there. And Facebook and Instagram and TikTok have all made it super easy to just do ads. You don't have to do any special stuff anymore. It's all about creatives and how well you make the creatives. So realistically, all you need to do is shove money and have like 50 creatives, test which ones do the best, and then rework them and keep doing that over and over again. And that's your entire time as a growth marketer. You're just like testing different creatives and messages to see what works, testing different faces, and then you just keep optimizing from there. At some point, AI is just going to do it for us, so it'll be a better learning algorithm.
I've always been really interested by that, like, because to me, it's always about finding an edge, right? Like it's arbitrage essentially, to borrow a term from fintech. And if you made the best bot in the world, right, the best arbitrage bot that could just find every little edge in the market and extract maximum value from it, and then you open source that bot, it's going to stop working, right? Because it's not an edge anymore when everyone has it. And I'm really, really curious to see how that shapes out, because I also don't feel comfortable making the claim that humans are going to be better at making ads than AI. But I don't know how to reconcile those two views, and I don't know where that leaves us.
Yeah, there is a future where arbitrage just doesn't exist because there's no edges left anymore because everything has become perfectly like uniform, right?
No, but then the edges be not being uniform. The edge would be going weird. So you'll go through oscillations, right? For sure, you'll go through oscillations where it's like cool to be part of the in group, and then it'll be cool to be part of the out group. And then, you know, like you're just going to go back and forth, and there'll be flavors and seasons to how you do things.
Let me posit sort of an example. So let's say the recruitment market, right? There's billions of dollars going to recruiters purely because of the inefficiencies of being able to match people to jobs, right? But there's an AI that could perfectly understand every single company in the world, every single job that exists, and then the skill sets of every single human, and they can reroute humans to learn the right things and sort of match them. Do you need recruiters anymore? Like, does that arbitrage, like essentially arbitrage is just like finding differences between the supply and demand and like trying to figure out whether that, like, take that value and create money out of it in some cases, right? Especially in the case of recruitment. So does the edge of recruiters go away because you just have an AI that can seamlessly match everything and it's become uniform, if that makes sense?
No, but the edge moves.
Okay.
Because then the question is about how does a company, like how does the customer of that recruiter get the best talent, right? Because sometimes the best talent isn't talent that like is, and I don't know, maybe some super AI would be able to figure this part out too, but it's not going to be one uniform AI because every company is going to have different like needs. But sometimes you make a hire, like especially senior executive hire, because you want serious dramatic change in your organization. And so you want to hire someone in accordance with that. And it's essentially advertising. Like when you are when you're trying to hire in really top talent, you have to advertise to them. They're harder, honestly, in my experience, than investors to get them to make that investment. Because an investor can make several investments at the end of the day, whereas you can only put your time in one place at any given moment. And so when you're trying to hire a COO, a CEO, a CTO, like any C-suite staff, or even like VPs, directors, heads of departments, you're essentially advertising. And so the recruiting layer doesn't help you in that sense. And so you have to find a new way that says, okay, well, what's the non-recruiter way to find C-suite staff now? You know, maybe it's throwing parties and trying to get them to sign a contract while they're drunk. You're like, who knows? Like, what's the strategy going to be? But I think in that sense, the arbitrage still has to come from somewhere if you want to lead the pack in terms of assembling the best team. The arbitrage for the recruiter definitely goes away. But in this analogy to my finance example, the recruiter is more like the bot and the trader is the hirer and the C-suite executive is the market.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think like you're right in the sense that if there's always like components to the system that are not like almost like non-deterministic, like just like won't go with the status flow. Like there'll be people trying to get edges, people won't work rationally, like they'll do things. It's kind of impossible to get like an algorithm to like smooth that all out. It's just going to have inconsistencies anyway. If everyone acted like a robot and a hive mind, then yes, like obviously that could make sense. And you have like a fully uniform system with no bumps. But yeah, that makes sense. All right. So today we're going to be talking about SaaS, right?
Not ads.
Not ads.
Sounds like we should do an episode on ads though.
I actually really want to do an episode on ads. Maybe the deep tech. Yeah. Okay. So do you know what the first SaaS company was?
I don't.
So there's like two alternative stories. The first pure SaaS company to ever start was Salesforce, which I didn't actually know that was the case until I like searched up and did some research. But they started in March 1999, which feels way older than I ever thought they were. Like for some reason I thought Salesforce was like a little bit more newer, like in 2010 sort of era. But you know, they're almost 25 years old. Started by 3 co-founders. And they're the first company that started a pure SaaS software. If you look at selling software, there are some companies that did it before, like Concur also has like the claim to fame as the first SaaS company. They sold packaged software as a service in some sense, but they sold floppy disks and CD-ROMs of travel and expense software. So they started, you know, a little bit earlier than Salesforce. They went public in 1998, and then in the crash of 2001, their market cap just like plummeted. I think it went all the way down to 8 million from a few, you know, probably $1 billion or something. I don't know what the market cap was in the peak. However, they did evolve into a pure SaaS business. So instead of doing the whole like selling floppy disks and CD-ROMs, they started doing a more SaaS model. And then I thought, okay, well, what is actually a SaaS from a definition perspective? And there's a few definitions out there, but it seems that the main definition is if the data is transferred over a network to the SaaS provider, and then computation is done there and then sent back, that's essentially a SaaS software.
Sorry, just to actually define SaaS, software as a service.
Yes. Yeah, software as a service. But then, like, there's going some nuances around, like, okay, if you're selling CD-ROMs and just giving them software to host themselves, is that a SaaS?
Well, it's also the case that definition that you gave covers literally all servers. I send you some data, some calculation happens, and you send me some data back. Like, even if you wanted to download a software, that's how it works.
I guess you could claim that, like, if you're like renting servers off Amazon, you still kind of own the infrastructure in some way, but like it sort of leaves your fictitious bounds of your company, right? You're like,
are you managing the machines on which your software is actually running? If you aren't, then it's some kind of SaaS-y thing is going on.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the first SaaS company, and it's been 25 years since, right? So it's a long period of time for SaaS to evolve, and there's been heaps of SaaS companies since then. I'm curious in your takes on like where SaaS goes, especially in this like post-privacy, post-AI sort of period. There's like a lot of inflection points happening right now. So I'm curious on your takes around SaaS, like what sort of happens.
Yeah. I mean, to touch on the privacy point, because we kind of touched on it before, I'm not really sure that I've seen that take off in the way that I thought it would. So I would love to say, I think that privacy is going to become a really big thing for SaaS in the future, and people are going to really care about having sovereignty over their own data and all this kind of shit. But I don't know that I actually see people starting to care about that, because I've kept making that bet and it's kept not really coming to fruition. Perhaps the only difference now is that as AI has entered the scene in a fundamentally new way, people might start caring more about their data. So maybe that's one thing. I'm curious as to what you think about subscriptions, though, because you mentioned this to me in prepping for this episode that you think subscriptions are going to die. And so the subscription model seems to be one of the reasons that SaaS really became like really good, but on both sides of the aisle, right? For the consumer and for the developer. And I remember seeing, like, really thinking this when I saw Microsoft make the change, when Office went from being Office version 1, version 2, version 3, or whatever, to version 365. And it's just on the cloud. So it's always up to date. So everyone's on the same version at all times. And instead of having to wait for your company to buy the latest version every other year, and then some companies do and some companies don't, and everyone's incompatible, everyone just pays a subscription fee. And so it works for the user because sort of broadly speaking, everyone is on the same version, and you don't have to worry about requisitioning new resources. Like, I mean, in a startup, it maybe doesn't matter so much, but the bigger the company gets, the harder and harder it is to, get budgetary approval to provision just the next version of the same piece of software that you've got already. And from the developer side, it obviously makes a ton of sense because you have like this locked in customer, and you can have very predictable revenue because subscription sales are sticky. But you seem to think it's going to go the other way.
Yeah. So just really quickly on the privacy side of things, I was curious about this, right? So DuckDuckGo is the privacy browser, right, that people sort of go to if they're worried about privacy. And it's not strictly SaaS, but I think DuckDuckGo is a really good almost proxy for like the interest in privacy preservation, right? And if you look at the market share in the United States, it's currently at 2% of the search market, right? So only 2% of the entire United States uses DuckDuckGo. And in other countries, it's slightly lower. Worldwide, it's 0.5%. Germany, slightly higher, 0.8%. So it's still relatively small. I think it's like a very niche user base, but I also think that niche user base are like power users and like really interested in that space. So there is almost like a culty style like phenomena around it, right? Which can be helpful from a growth perspective.
I use DuckDuckGo.
Yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to mention from a privacy perspective. On the SaaS thing, right, or the subscription revenue side of things. So we've looked at studies and surveys around the education side of things, just because we run an ed tech company. And one of the things that people don't want is subscription payments. So they just don't want subscription payments. But every ed tech company around 2020, 2021, they were sort of like pushing towards switching to subscriptions. I saw many companies switch from a flat payment to pay us this monthly fee, right? But from a user perspective, people didn't want that. And it makes sense. Like, in general, people don't want a recurring payment if they don't have to. You also saw this with like Aura. So Aura had their Aura ring, which was just a flat payment. And then they're like,
That's dumb.
Here's $7. Peloton did the same thing. And so like everyone from a company perspective thinks that MRR and recurring revenue is a stronger type of revenue, which is fair. I think from a user perspective, it's harder to swallow sometimes. So I am seeing a bit of a trend the opposite direction. So one of the things we've done, like just for our SaaS payments, is we've done yearly payments for the most part. So Slack, Canva, all the stuff we don't think is going away, we're doing yearly payments to save as much money as possible. And we're really trying to optimize our payments for these SaaS software because they're getting quite expensive. We're spending almost 5 to 10 grand on SaaS per month, right? Depending on the month.
What?
Yeah. So
that's insane.
You look at Slack payments, like that adds up. Intercom's very expensive. Like we're spending a lot of money on that. Our AI bill is starting to add up as well. We just had a free credits come in, so we're sort of getting rid of that now. But like, it just sort of adds up really quickly.
Okay, so the AI I can understand, but like, man, I got to take a look at your your cash flow and balance sheet because my company has 20 people in it, and we maybe spend that much a year on SaaS.
Yeah, we had this conversation around costs just on team members this morning, and so I really need to figure out what I'm doing wrong in terms of SaaS bills. There are some SaaS that like it's just very expensive, and I'm also including some subscriptions around like productized services, which is sort of included. Like we have video creative editors, we have AI tools like Runway ML, we have our design agency, which we also included part of that.
Sure. Okay. If you start including design agencies, I wouldn't really call that SaaS.
It's a productized service. It doesn't really feel like a agency per se. We just like input data and we get data out. So by that definition, I'm kind of counting that as SaaS.
It's like something as a service, right?
Yeah. I might just like go through my balance sheet on subscriptions on the podcast live, kind of go through it at some point. Might be interesting.
Fair enough.
So the trend I'm seeing is a lot of one-off payment software and self-hosted. So one of the issues that we found with entry level is like we have a big community. We have 5 to 10,000 people in I think it's a little bit more than 10,000 now actually, in our Discord community. We would rather use Slack because with communities, you want to stay on platforms that people are already using. So if people are on Facebook, do a Facebook community. If they're on WhatsApp, do WhatsApp. But yeah, and StartMate, which is one of the accelerator programs here in Australia, had the same issue where they have a big community and Slack said, all right, pay us $120,000 a year to like host your community. And they were like, what the fuck? We're not going to pay that, obviously. So he's like, Batco, the CEO, is trying to look for different alternatives. And one of the alternatives we're looking at was like Campfire, which is like you pay once. The company is called Once, actually. It says Once as the company name, product name is Campfire. And you pay once for the software and then you self-host it. And it's just like a Slack clone. Like it's very straightforward. And I think that makes so much sense. Like why pay, I think we pay almost $2,000 a year on Slack, something like that, right? Whatever the membership is. So why pay that when I can pay $200 once and never pay again? I just have a self-hosted Slack, right? That makes a lot of sense to me as a consumer.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and I think so. I mean, I have many comments on this. So the first is that like your initial example highlights some of the differences between direct to consumer and selling to another business. So from a business perspective, it actually really doesn't matter what the cost structure is, right? I'm going to have to budget for it either way because I can pay my $200 for camp, but then I have to think about the cost of provisioning the hardware. How does that scale? The engineer's time. If you have an engineer that you're paying $120,000 a year, that means you're paying them $60 an hour. And so if it takes them an hour a week to maintain this server, which I can tell you is probably around the right mark for even super simple software, there's going to be hiccups and you're going to trip over things and software never works the way you think it's going to work. And you want to make sure it's secure as well so people can't just like break in. Now you have to worry about all of this stuff, right? So call it 2 hours a week. Realistically, your actual all-in cost there is $120 a week in terms of the time that your engineer is now having to do that. Plus the cost of the context switch to say, hey, you're an engineer, you're typically working on, in our case, like supercomputing infrastructure, but now I also want you to work on this like really weird piece of infrastructure for 1 hour a week. So I think those like costs are things that as a business you start to really consider or you should be considering. And I often, like when I look at an expensive SaaS thing, or like when I'm like, do I want to pay $200 a month for this? The very first question I ask myself is, okay, do I need it? But the very second question I ask is, how many hours a month of my developer time does this save? Because if you don't consider that, then you're not really taking all the costs into consideration. Now, for direct to consumer, the equation is obviously different because they don't have like a balance sheet in the same way that a business does, and they're not thinking about it like that. And I totally agree with you that like a once-off purchase point for a consumer makes perfect sense. And if we go back to, what I was saying before about your businesses and not wanting to have to go through the pain of provisioning the next version of the software each time, a consumer doesn't have an analogy of that, right? Other than maybe kids in a family unit where they're waiting for their parents to buy the latest version of Windows. I remember that feeling. And so I think for consumers, it definitely makes sense. And I also think that there is like subscription fatigue, where you have this model that really worked for some people. And then you had groups like Peloton and like even Whoop come in and say like, oh, we're going to try this model too. And it's even more egregious when there's a physical product involved. I think the most egregious version of this I ever saw, and it's not quite SaaS, was when I bought my first Tesla. It was great. It was fantastic. I loved it. 3 months in, I got this little like, pay $499 to activate your seat warmers. They've already put the fucking seat warmer in any expense that they've incurred has already been paid. And it was just like, when you see that, you're like, that is ridiculous. That's like the most egregious form of this. And I think consumers to me, it's not even about the equation. I would happily have paid an extra $500 when purchasing the car for the seat warmers. It's the principle that starts getting really annoying. Like when you spend $500 to purchase a Whoop, and then you have to pay $99 a year to like get any of the benefit of having the Whoop. I can absolutely see why people are getting sick and tired of that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Consumer side, I definitely see that. I mean, I'm feeling it on the business side as well, and I'm just seeing a little bit of a trend on that side. Like with the Whoop, as an example, I just paid the 2 years up front because I didn't want to feel like it was a subscription. Now it feels like I just paid for it. Just mentally had to get over that. There is another example with Signpost or Signhouse. So I got an email one day from these guys at Signhouse that said like, hey, we're doing a one-off payment. So do you use DocuSign or PandaDoc, or like what do you use for signing documents right now?
Whatever people send me. Yeah, ask my head of ops. Okay,
so you have to pay a subscription for that. And so I saw this offer, which was like, hey, we're tired of subscriptions. You charge $200 to $800 per year. So here's a lifetime deal. Just pay us once and you can just use it forever. And this is a cloud offering too. So I was a bit like, oh, like in my head, to be honest, I paid the $300 because I was like, even if they're scamming me, it's okay. I'm willing to take that risk just in case like it does save me that much money. And it has. Like I've been using it the entire time. And it's been great. We don't have to pay for any additional users. Even this thing, right? Like the one user versus like 10 or 25 users, like I don't really know how I felt about that because realistically, they both have infinite documents, infinite signees, so didn't really need the additional users. I think we bought the basic, and that's what we've been using ever since for the last, I want to say, almost a year. Like, yeah, so and I've not paid the subscription fee, and I feel great about it because every time I use it, I'm like, yeah, this is good.
That makes tons of sense. Yeah, you would believe the kinds of crazy things that our ops team does to avoid paying for team versions of plans because they get out of control so quickly. I mean, the example you gave between Slack and like Discord and Campfire, like I had that exact problem where we're trying to set up this community for computational chemists, and most companies use Slack, and so it makes sense to say, well, let's set up a Slack community. And then you look at the pricing for this, and it's just obscene. Like I'm not paying that. It's actually not worth it. And that's kind of wild. Like there have been very few instances when there's been a product that I use as ubiquitously as something like Slack that I truly said, that's actually not worth it. I really wish I could do it, but it's not worth it. Very rarely does that happen because companies usually figure that shit out. And this seems to just be a weird corner of Slack where they've just not quite figured out. Like I actually think they're missing a big Discord-like market for communities.
Yeah. Okay, I did find my subscription list. So how about I tell you my biggest subscriptions per year and you can roast me. So Google G Suite, 3,700 a year.
Believable.
Yeah, I think that's just like,
Yeah.
we got to pay it. Equity management software, 6,600 a year. Because we have all this international sort of equity stuff that we got to...
Equity management software.
Yeah, for giving out ESOP and equity and stuff like that. So
Interesting.
Zoom, 1,300 a year.
Why do you use Zoom when you have G Suite?
Yeah, I'm rethinking that Zoom membership, to be honest.
Mm.
We use it for like breakout rooms because G Suite doesn't have breakout rooms. That's the biggest like issue right now.
Zoom has breakout rooms?
Yeah, so you can split people into smaller groups of 3 or 4, and it also allows for webinars. Like, so because we do events with our education company, right? So we do things
Okay.
like that. So
yeah, okay, that makes sense. I mean, you're fully remote, so I guess you need it a bit more.
Typeform, 1,600 a year, which is like a form software that we use for like all kinds of forms.
Okay.
Could probably use something else to save money. Notion, 3,600 a year.
Yeah, I got my Notion bill recently. Wait, 3,000? How's your Notion bill bigger than mine?
I don't know. I wish I knew.
I am trying to delete people off Notion because we've got some lingering accounts from people that used to work with us that no longer work with us. I have no idea how to do it, and it pisses me off. Like I got to the point where I had to Google how to do this, and then I couldn't feel like even then, like following the instructions, like go to this thing and then go to this section. I'm like, that section doesn't exist. I don't know.
Okay, I can help you with that if you need. That doesn't seem that insane.
All right. I challenge you to figure out how to delete people from my Notion.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's actually impossible.
Yeah, too easy. I'll do that. All right. Xero, 1,500 a year. Because we have 2 entities in 2 different countries.
What is Xero?
Oh, that's accounting software.
Oh, the accounting software.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Crunchbase. I don't think we pay for that. I don't even think that's a subscription. Why is it there? I just did a free trial and cancelled it. Okay, so forget that one. So that was meant to be 1,800 a year, but we don't pay that. So I don't think that exists. Webflow, 2.2K a year, which is our main sort of website hosting. So we build a lot of websites. Sendinblue, 12K roughly, or 11K.
What is Sendinblue?
It's Brevo, which is the email. It's a sort of email suite that we send emails from, like mass emails.
Why?
Email automation, all that kind of stuff.
Why do you spend 12K on emails?
When you have like a lot of users, a lot of emails, and you're automating emails, you end up sending like millions of emails a month. So it ends up costing a lot of money. So direct to consumer, I guess. Maybe there's a better solution. Metabase, 2K a year. Segment, 1.5K a year. Vercel, 1.7K a year. GitHub. Jeez, why are we paying so much on GitHub? 1.5? Convert API, 1.5K. Bunch of random stuff. Honestly, the dev team uses that stuff. Ahrefs, 3.6K.
What is Ahrefs?
It's a keyword researching tool. It allows you to figure out like where trends are going and what people are searching. So
that's pretty cool.
It's useful for us. Canva, now it's down to 700 a year. It's not too bad. Beehive, 1.8K a year, which is a newsletter software.
Give me the bottom line. How much are you spending in total per year?
Per year, what is this? 10, 25, 50, 78K. Maybe you should just go through this with me at some point. I'm curious to see your thoughts.
The very first thought that comes to my mind is that, again, do the equation, right? Like at 78K, that's it's a person. You could get a junior developer. Yeah, that's a person, right? And so are all these software truly saving you an entire full-time person that could just do this stuff manually? And I would guess that the answer is partially. Right, which puts you in this really awkward gray zone because, like, okay, if you pay $78 for a pure ops person and you say your job is to not need as much of this SaaS crap as possible, right? Then like things like handling zero, for example. Yeah, an ops person can do that instead of using zero, right? Like they could just.
There's no chance. You can't do this off zero. You need zero. We have someone that uses zero, but like, what are you gonna do? Like Google spreadsheets, all your finances?
Yeah. Why not? Direct to bank. But they're not going to be able to replace everything, right?
Yeah.
You need like a half ops, half a dev, because things like email, like you go lower down the stack. Like at the point that you're spending like $100,000 on emails, for example, like alone, which I guess all direct to consumers get to eventually, you want to go down the stack to like super low level email APIs. And then you're building your own shit on top of that. So because a single full-time engineer absolutely can do that.
So I think there's a bunch of stuff we've cancelled or do not pay for anymore that's still in this list. Like this is a Notion list that one of my team members put together on like subscriptions because we're auditing everything right now. So I think some of this is wrong, but I think we could cancel 20% of this and probably have the same impact. So that's the current plan. We're going to cut down on subscriptions. Anyway, coming back to the SaaS discussion, I hate subscriptions. Like, it's ridiculous. I'm going to pay for all this stuff. I just want to self-host everything and have open source versions. So if this pans out, and the other reason I think this is going to happen is because AI is just going to be get to the point where you said a human can do it, right? Well, if I have an AI that can just build zero for me and build all these things for me, like why am I paying these subscriptions? I can just self-host everything. The AI will pull open source code, edit it, launch it for me. So that's why I think SaaS will die, like subscription. Yeah. That's my main thesis.
So when I heard that thesis first, I presumed what it meant was that the SaaS product itself would be something that isn't needed anymore because you could simply have an AI build whatever that SaaS product is for you. I'm not sure about that in the near term, but I think what's going to happen first is that most SaaS products are ultimately there to remove some kind of inconvenience from operations, whether that's developer operations or whether it's just human operations. And developers are not humans. Non-developer operations. But to your point, an AI agent, right, can just go through and if they really fucking had to, manually go through and send 10,000 emails in a day. Because they're not going to get tired, right? And so do you still need email software for that? At some point, maybe Google rate limits you and says, what the hell are you doing? But I think for the most part, that's going to be where we start seeing SaaS die off. Like these just basic, save yourself an hour here, an hour there. I'll charge you $5 a month. And before you know it, you've got 10 of these and, the costs are racking up. A generalized AI agent is going to be faster and cheaper. Is that how you see it going down?
Yeah, I think something like that. Or also just like coding clones. I think a very near-term example is like if people are going to start publishing these more open source software versions of like SaaS that we use that are like continuously being updated and you just pay for once and you have the license to use it forever, then I can just go to GPT-4 and be like, hey, here's the thing. Can you help me set it up? And like, I don't want to pay for the subscription anymore. And then you just self-host it.
So one question I had for you, speaking of open source, is why did you go for something like Campfire over something like Mastodon?
Because I don't know what Mastodon is.
Oh, Mastodon's like a free version of like social media, right? So it's kind of like, it's a little bit like Twitter, but it also has this sort of like messaging aspect to it. So you can just basically set up your own private Discord server, for example. I mean, Discord's also a great example, right? It's free for like freaking huge number of users in a server.
Yeah, Discord's a great example. I think Campfire was just like a very one-to-one example of like, all right, we don't want to pay for Slack anymore, so we're just going to create a open source version of Slack that you can just self-host that has pretty much the same user interface as Slack, right? Discord, for some reason, just like is really hard to switch people that are in the working community to use. So it's just harder to get adoption from that front. So
interesting, because you think it's the same.
Yeah. Exactly the same. Last example I wanted to do on the subscription thing is like N8N, which is a self-hosted version of Zapier, essentially. So you can basically just self-host it,
sweet,
do all those things, but they still charge you a monthly fee for that. And I think it's to do with support and some other stuff. So there is like interesting ways that they're trying to get around this. So like, yes, we want to help you self-host and save money compared to Zapier, but we're still going to monetize in some way by giving you support and things like that. The issue is I don't think they make it optional, so you still have to pay for it. I think it would be useful if they like had optional monetization schemes, because I know that's how like Linux and Mozilla and
It's how it used to be with a lot of software, was
Yeah.
that you would have kind of two options, which is like host it yourself, in which case you pay $99, right? Or host it with us and pay X dollars per month. And that always made sense to me, because for the reasons I explained before, it's like if I'm going to self-host it, I have to like spend X dollars a month on my hardware and my humans that are going to maintain all of this. And maybe in the future that's going to be AIs, but I'm still going to have to pay for the hardware, right? So it made sense to pay that money to a cloud manager instead and say, yes, it's $2,000 a month, but it would take me a whole engineer. Heroku, in the old days, so that was my first encountering of this, where it's like you spend $5,000 a month on your Heroku bill, right? And if you look at the equivalent compute, it was maybe half of that if you just got it directly from Amazon. But you would definitely spend an entire engineer to even maintain slightly the benefit that Heroku was giving you. And so maybe an entire team of engineers. And so the price was just, it made total sense. It almost didn't matter how big your Heroku bill got until you were truly operating on, 100 servers. It really didn't matter.
I think that's going to come back. I hope it does. That sort of pricing model and thinking about it in that way from a software perspective. Okay, was there something you wanted to discuss in the SaaS space?
Well, I guess, okay, so simple SaaS, as we've discussed it, which is just these like kind of basic products. There's not really technical risk involved in them. Like you could definitely build it if you really had to. You just don't want to. And it's really just about the economics. Is it more pain and more expensive to do this myself, or should I just buy it off someone, right? That's what I would categorize as simple SaaS. And then there's actually Heroku maybe moves in the other direction, right? It starts simply in the more complex SaaS, which is like, even if I had an entire team of engineers, I'm not actually sure that I'd pull it off as well as these guys have pulled it off, right? It really depends on the team. They'd have to be super focused. They'd have to really nail it. It would be very expensive to do nonetheless. An example of that, like a really sort of modern example of that is AI, right? ChatGPT is arguably SaaS. It's definitely SaaS. I pay my $20 a month to Anthropic or GPT, whatever, and I chat with their bot and I get the benefit. Trying to build that myself, you can, but it's an entire team, like an entire company, to just say, I mean, entire companies literally do exist around saying, take all these models, we'll build the deployment infrastructure, we'll deploy these models, we'll run them. Running these AI systems is incredibly difficult. They are very large, and getting access to a sufficient number of GPUs to scale a product like that to the millions of users that you need to be interesting as a company is really challenging. Doing that yourself, like even just requisitioning a 24/7 GPU machine so that you can get responses in a few seconds from an AI, is more than you would spend on your subscription. And the reason for that is that you're not using ChatGPT 24/7, but you don't want there to be a spin-up time. You don't want to log into your app and then have to wait 10 minutes for your machine to come online, and then you pay for the 1 hour of machine time that you're actually going to use that day, and then it spins down again. That's just a horrendous experience, and it removes all your productivity gains. So you basically have to pay for this machine 24/7, which is going to cost you like north of $1,000 or $2,000 a month. Unless I guess you could buy the GPUs and set it up in-house and have your own little server thing in your office, but then you've got to think about how you connect that to the network. And it starts being it's definitely non-trivial for a group like Entry Level, for example, to try to put something like that together.
But is there a world where, for example, instead of me paying $80K a year on SaaS, it just becomes $20K a year to rent out this server that like I'm going to shove all my different software on?
Could be.
Does that start making sense? Is that like where the inflection point is, where companies have dedicated servers, but they sort of centralize all their systems together?
It could be. I hope it becomes something like that. My counterpoint, I mean, maybe this must be temporary, But if you try to get a GPU machine right now, even before the AI boom, you can't. You actually have to manually email a customer service and tell them why you need this GPU machine and what it is that you're doing with it. And you have to like get on your knees and like bow down to whatever sales rep is on the other side and threaten them that you're going to move to a competitor in order to get access to a basic GPU machine. So even then, like actually getting the stuff rented is not easy.
Yeah, makes sense. I think on the whole simple SaaS thing, totally agree with that. There's also another term for it, which is micro SaaS, which is just like a SaaS platform that does a very niche specific thing. For example, like, a mock interview platform that generates mock interviews for you, or a tax preparation software that just does maybe only the crypto part of your tax, like those sort of smaller things, right? Those things, I agree. I think like AI is just going to get rid of those things pretty quickly. Like there's no need anymore to pay these, like, even if it's $5 a month, there's no need to pay for these like smaller tools when they can all become consolidated. I think people are already like a little bit annoyed by the fact that there's 50 or 60 different software you have to use just to run a particular task, right? So people want it to be, coming together in some way. So that makes sense to me.
There are classic like waves of centralization and decentralization, right? Where people go through these moods where they want one app that does it all. And then they kind of move away from that and they want one app to focus on just one thing and get it perfectly right. And I do think we're moving into an era of re-centralization where, and I don't mean this in terms of like the crypto blockchain centralization, decentralization, just like one big app to rule them all or 100 mini apps. And you're starting to see it even with things like Notion, which are really trying to be like the God app of, taking notes, having wikis, internal documentation, to-do lists, small databases, small task automation. It's documents, sheets, PowerPoints, like mini websites, even all in one place. And you see it, they kind of do it all to an approximation, but they don't absolutely nail any one of those use cases. China is big on like centralized apps. You've got WeChat, which just does everything, the everything app. Musk is apparently trying to make X into the everything app in the West.
We can say all we want, but WeChat is an amazing business model. Like just centralize everything. Every single app is a micro app inside of WeChat, and then they take a clip of it. Like, can't hate the economics around it.
It's an operating system, right? Like it's a browser almost.
Yeah. The other trend I'm seeing, which I'm actually excited about, and like considering what I can do in this space, but it's just software, but done beautifully. That's it. They just take the same software and just make it elegant and beautiful and like change it up. So I'll show you a couple of examples.
Riverside versus Squadcast.
You got me on Arc browser, but it was just like the website alone is amazing. So we're looking at a different kind of browser experience with side tabs, and like they always come in with new stuff. Like every week they're publishing something new that they're trying with the spaces or the way they do things. The other one I have is Akiflow. Also, I noticed this interesting thing where they changed the.
I was just about to ask what that was.
Yeah, how did they? I don't know how they did that, but I might steal that. Basically, the taskbar I don't know what that's called. The URL bar, the header of the site changes to come back when you deprioritize that tab and go to a different tab. But Akiflow is just a really nice productivity tool. Like I use it every day now, and it's become my central sort of triaging platform for like any tasks that come from Slack or email. Like if I star an email, if I save a Slack post, it all goes into Akiflow. So it just like becomes my universal inbox for tasks, which is really useful. Hey.com, just a way nicer email experience. I couldn't get on board, unfortunately, because I didn't want to pay the subscription, and I'm already paying for Google. So
I looked at this and I actually didn't think it looked that beautiful. It didn't appeal to me.
There are some people out there that think it's beautiful, so I'm going to add this in the category of like software but beautifully done. Last example I have is Reflect, which is just like a notes-taking tool. I use this for a bit, but Notion just is so ingrained with everything I do and what everyone else does. It's kind of hard to like switch, but sick website, like the glowing thing, and the dark theme. But yeah, this is another example of like software but beautifully done. So I'm curious, like, where's the opportunity? What other software do we need to do but make it look beautiful? That's what I've been thinking about. So
I mean, I think the issue with this is that, as with everything, you need an edge, right? And if it's not a technical edge, you need to be a designer. So it really just comes down to how much you trust your design skills, and being bold and brave with some kind of design. Good design is something you like. You know it when you see it, but it's really hard to implement. I love seeing beautifully done products. I think there's a huge gap for doing it right, but doing it right is so subtle. It's not just the UI, it is the UX. It's just understanding the tiny little things. You want animations everywhere, but how long does an animation take to happen before it's actually more annoying than helpful? How do you, like, when you want less in an interface, where do you put the other stuff? And which stuff do you prioritize and deprioritize? That's not a question about UI. It's a question about UX. And those things require either deep insight into the like ideal product experience, or just really fucking amazing like designers. And amazing designers are so hard to find because when they're amazing, they ultimately spin out and create their own design companies. And you just can't ever keep them. Even Apple couldn't keep John Ive.
The amount of designers that spin out to start their own agencies because they realize that they're good, way too many. It's so hard to keep them around. Yeah. All right. Anyway, you should you need to head off, right?
I do. I'm going to peace out. I'll leave everyone with my amazing co-host, AJ.
All right. See you, bro. Okay. Now that Loong is gone, I'll say goodbye to you guys. So we talked about the SaaS episode, talked about the history of SaaS. We talked about elegantly designed SaaS. We talked about the potential death of subscriptions over time and potentially the death of micro or simple SaaS, and then also the compute storage side of things as well. So hopefully you enjoyed that episode. If you did enjoy that episode, you're going to take the technocratic oath, which basically means that you need to share it with one person, like, and maybe comment as well. That would be helpful. And that's because we put a lot of time and effort into these episodes. We do a lot of research. We take our time out of the day to record it. And, we think that should be free. So we actually charge for that, but we don't charge in dollars. We charge in likes, comments, and subscribes. So you can do that for us. That'd be amazing, super helpful. And yeah, hope you enjoyed that episode, and we'll see you next time.